You're doing this because he took KR. That's why you started with the pedagogy, right? Like you just want to talk about KR and TBLT.
It just makes sense. Hello everyone, this is James from LLP, and today we will be interviewing Fabio Spano with his paper talking about the use of a board game or a card game in his classroom. This is a walkthrough and we're going to walk you through it. So let's begin. First of all, let's introduce everybody. So from Brandon.
Yes, I'm Brandon Essery. I'm an associate professor of Italian and chair of the Department of World Languages and Cultures at Elon University, and that's in North Carolina in the U.S.
Next up is Casey.
Hello, I'm a high school English teacher at a private high school here in Japan.
Okay, and the man himself, Fabio.
Hi, I'm an experienced English teacher now, and a master's student at International Christian University in Tokyo, and I'm studying education and psychology. My focus is on the usage of games when teaching English as a foreign language.
Okay, I'm James. I'm the host and one of the co-editors of LLP. Following is Jonathan.
Hi, I'm Jonathan. I also do some things at LLP, and I'm an associate professor at the University of Shizuoka in Japan.
And finally, we have Neil.
Hi, I'm Neil McFadden. I'm a public school teacher in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada.
So the format of this podcast will be to ask Fabio to introduce his Ludic, his language, and his pedagogy. We're going to then talk to the reviewers about their opinions of the paper and their impressions. Fabio is going to give his proudest moments, and then we're going to wrap it up with some questions. So, over to you, Fabio. Could you tell us about your teaching context? Where were you teaching?
I was teaching in a junior high school in the province of Nagano in the Japanese Alps, in a very small city, actually. It was a junior high school in the countryside, actually.
So what was the age range of the students?
It was a junior high school, so 13, 14, 15. So I've been
English
teaching.
A mandatory subject, yeah. Okay.
English actually starts to being a subject in the first year of junior high school. So basically, even if they studied before, but not like as an official subject, the formal English education starts in junior high school. So the junior high school first year we treat them as total beginners, even if they're not. So we start from ABC. So I've been teaching for 3 years in the school. I was an assistant professor. I have assistant professor duties. So sometimes I was just supporting the other teachers. Some of the time I got my the freedom to carry on my own project. This happened even the first and the second year I was teaching there. During the third year, During the third year, I managed to introduce the game-based teaching project. So I started using my special time, which was once a week, sometimes once every 2 weeks, to play a game, to teach English through a game.
Okay. And so what was the language goal then of this class, other than just English? Was it speaking? Was it textbook-based? What was the language goals of the class?
Well, the language goal of my project is, like put it bluntly, was to boost communication skills, but also to give freedom of production. Because something I noticed during regular class in my first 2 years in the school is that the students produce only when directly asked to produce something from the teacher. There was no production freedom, and there was no chance actually to use English they studied the previous year. So what students were doing during class, it was to use for a specific purpose, which was like passing a test, the language they studied like 1 week earlier. So after reading a couple of studies and after reading about, cognitive learning and also text-based language teaching, I noticed that my kids were missing completely this aspect of language production, an aspect that is not just testing memory. So the cognitive aspect of learning was completely out of the picture.
So you kind of recognized a gap then, that they were studying towards tests, they were doing textbook stuff, and you wanted to improve their speaking and communication in an authentic way. Does that sound about right?
That was, like I was trying to have some authenticity in the production, speak because you want to speak, not because you're told to. I was trying to create that situation. And I realized that after reading papers.
You mentioned TBLT as the approach there. So the pedagogy you'd say would be TBLT.
Yeah. When specific on the pedagogy will be TBLT for various reasons. First is the way I learned English, because in Europe we have the Sefer, according to somebody. And the Sefer is an action-based, task-based curriculum. So the students are evaluated based on what they can do with the language, not on how much grammar or much vocabulary they know. So I got this knowledge because I learned this way. And also Japan just adopted this version of the Sefer called the Sefer J, which is an adaptation of the Sefer. So I took the chance to introduce the way I learned in a country, in a situation where this method was starting to become like official. So I saw a window there where I could jump in with my experience, and I took it. Yeah.
Okay. Could you take us through the structure of the class very briefly? What did you do from week 1 to week 7, I believe it is? What was the structure?
All the work is based on Kotoba rollers by James York. I don't know if you're here in your... But yeah, James York Kotoba rollers, and which is TBLT, and it follows the pre-task, task, post-task kind of cycle. So what I did is to organize some kind of language background or language preparation for the student to start the game, because even if I want them to produce freely, I still had to give them something, to get ready. So we talked about the context of the game. I taught them the game rules in English, and we played in Japanese the first time. That was the pre-task. So getting them ready to start for the general concept of the game and getting them ready to start playing the game. Then we jumped into playing. That was from lesson 2. That was the first one was lesson 1. So the playing in Japanese and then getting ready for with the basic language necessary to play the game. From lesson 2 to lesson 5, we basically just played the game. We reviewed a lot of language. I asked the student what language what they wanted to say in English, but what they couldn't. So the language they gave them in the following classes came from the student mostly.
Okay, so it's reactive on your part. This is what you need help with. In a task-based methodology, then as part of the post-task, it's the teacher finding errors and areas that need work on, and then you both putting that in and then asking the students what they want to work on as well. So it's kind of reactive in that way, yeah?
Yes. One very important part of the roller is is analyzing the game, or studying the game, or just analyzing the language they use during the game, which is the main post task of this of my project and of Kotoba rollers. So after playing for 3 or 4 times, we actually stopped, and for one lesson we didn't play. It was a game lesson, but we didn't play. We just analyzed the gameplay, and we just studied the language we wanted to use. We worked on accuracy from fluency. For the first time, they tried to write the language they wanted to use, or the language it was necessary to play the game. And then we went back on playing.
I see. So it was play, analyze, and then kind of replay, a kind of cycle of replaying the game and getting better as you replay, yeah?
Exactly. The last step, class 7, the last class, because the project was 7 classes in total, it was reflection. Right. So students had to reflect on what they improved, how much they improved, and what they liked about the project. And thanks to the evaluation, I noticed that, as I was hoping for, many students realized that the best improvement was not strictly language-based, but it was also cognitive. Some students answered that the thing they learned was to lie in English, or they understood that it's important to speak positively so they could become the leader, because the game I played, I have a leader. And if they realize I have to be positive to become the leader, to win. That was a great realization that is useful in so many environments you think about. So other than the linguistic improvement, I had the cognitive improvement I was looking for.
And perhaps something that you wouldn't have known about the students if you hadn't included the reflection activity. If they hadn't told you that, you wouldn't have known that. So yeah, very important to make that learning explicit.
Exactly, and I wouldn't have seen that if I did not spend like 7 classes playing.
Gotcha.
That's those kind of realization from the student, this kind of enjoyment of the freedom of production started after the 5th class we spent playing. Okay. If I had to evaluate on the only time we played, the first time we played, I would have stopped the project immediately because it was not satisfactory. I got nothing out of it.
Right, that's a very important point, that you needed to keep playing and see the improvement microgenetically. Yeah. So
during the project,
go on, sorry.
During the project, I had moments when I thought this is not good. After the 2nd class, for example, this is not good enough. But now I'm extremely satisfied with the result.
What was your solution when you thought, because maybe other listeners or people thinking about doing games in their classroom, maybe they would be frustrated as well at a point where I don't think this is working and just quit. What kept you going?
Well, I can give an advice, which is do not forget that silence is part of learning. The silence phase is a very important part of learning a language. From even with your native language, kids experience a silent phase, when they're learning their first language. So I thought that my student were not producing enough because the game wasn't good enough or my explanation wasn't good enough. They needed to play more. After they played more, there was a silent phase even while playing the game. They wanted to do something strategically wise, but they did not have the language or the confidence to do it. So before evaluating how your game class is going, let them play more. If you stop at the first or second game classes, you will not understand. You will not even have started the cognitive improvement. The students' cognitive improvement will not even have started. So it's impossible to evaluate efficiently.
Fantastic. So slow things down, one might say.
Yeah, one might say that. I know a guy who will say that, yeah.
All right, okay. I've kept everybody in waiting. What was the game that you used in this classroom then? And why did you choose it?
I played a game called Two Rooms and a Boom, which is a card game, social deduction, secret role card game, where every student receives a card, and the cards have different roles on it, and the students have, through question, trying to understand what role do the other students have. So basically, communication is the most important part because they have to communicate in order to understand who's whom, and that's the most important thing in order to win the game.
Okay, so the game naturally promoted communication.
Yes, that was one communication.
Yep. Any other reasons for choosing it?
Yes, I've been reading a lot of paper about playing with games because I was looking for something that I could use in my situation at junior high school. That from the first year of junior high school, start from zero, we take for granted that the students never studied English before. So I need something that I could adapt to a very basic level, but it still could be used with even with students with better productive skills. So I guess the language range necessary for the game is one of the reasons why I pick it.
Anything to do with the price? Can any teacher use this game?
Well, the game is free.
Okay, so it's free. That's another bonus, right?
Yes, if you go in the website and Tuesday night games with a K, night games, you can find the Two Rooms and a Boom game, and in the main page there is a download link with a PDF, with all the printable PDF, with all the cards and everything you need to play the game.
Thank
you.
So
it was a free game, and that helped because every time I read solution with video games, I could not use it because we didn't have enough computers or enough, tech support to do it.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, that makes sense. If you've got a class of 30, keep it cheap, keep it easy, keep it, no network problems with cards. So, okay, so we've had Fabio talk about his Ludic, his language, and his pedagogy. And if you want to read more, there's a lot of detail. We'll probably pick into some of the highlights in the final section of the podcast, but of course, you can go and read it on the LLP website. Thank you, Fabio. I'm going to turn the mic now towards our reviewers. We have Brandon, we have Casey, and we have Neil here. And let's go down in order, I guess. Brandon, what was your reaction to the paper? And is it anything like your own context, or could you do something like this? What do you think?
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's just it's great to have seen this process, the growth, and just how amazing the final product is. So I tip my cap to Fabio and everyone else for the collaboration. I loved Fabio's response. It's like, and I feel this is what I do too. And it's like, oh no, this isn't going how I want. Faith in the game, believe the game. Like, the game is often better designed than I am, right? Than we are, Fabio, to teach, right? What we're trying to do. So I loved how he said that. When I first saw the paper, I thought, oh no, I use video games. Maybe I shouldn't be here. But I love too how we just kind of, after hearing Fabio, I'm realizing how much the common DNA is of the game, of pedagogy, of ludic pedagogy. So that's interesting. No, what overall, I loved how it was so student focused. I'm looking right now at the examples of student work and the blue pen and the encouragement. I mean, if it's not student focused, hey, you're not using the game right. Come on, it's about having fun with the players. But I really appreciated that aspect. And then I learned a lot in this whole notion of task-based learning, because one thing I do at Elon University as well is I'm the language assessment coordinator. So upon entering, there's 1,600 students, let's say, I have to decide where they belong. And so I feel like Fabio touched that really deep nerve of how there's a void between grades and what you can do, right? Whether you're using Axel or CFR, it's like, I need to know what you can do. And that's a real world thing. So I appreciate how he had his kind of hand on the pulse of the real world. What can my students do, and how can I help them do that? It's amazing.
Nice. Excellent. Casey, what do you think? Casey's one of our master reviewers, I guess. He's done quite a few now. So how does this one hold up to your previous papers that you reviewed?
I think one thing I really liked about this is the personal nature of it. Fabio gave us a really good insight from like the beginning to end of the process that he and the students went through, and the human side of everybody, I think, came out in this. Like you read a lot of papers, and sometimes they just feel very academic, and the research is just the numbers are it. You don't really get a sense of the people involved in it. And that's not true at all with this. This feels very human and people-centered. And that's something I really liked about it. And just like the process from beginning to end, the mistakes, the learning, fixing, and getting better, it's not a straight process. It's not a smooth process, for anybody. And that's all evident here in the paper. So I thought that was that's something I really enjoyed about it.
Thanks. Just to poke slightly, I guess. I know, Casey, you're also working in a high school in Japan. Is this something that you could perhaps utilize in your own context, or is there any barriers regarding that in your context? What do you think, having read it intimately? For me, this would be, I think, a little hard to do. Well, no, not a little. This would be hard to do for several things, for several reasons. The school that I'm working at is not, I don't want to put it in a bad light. It just, like, once they sort of have decided on the curriculum, that's it, right? Like, you don't really deviate from it. You could do like maybe a one-off, maybe for a few weeks. But to do something for, let's say, a semester would be a pretty big deviation from the norm. Fabio describes early on in his paper a little bit of the process that he went through to get this implemented. And I was kind of surprised that it happened, because I worked as an ALT for a while, and I could say that I don't know if any of the schools that I worked at would have been receptive to this sort of thing. I think they would have wanted to just stay with the curriculum and not change. So, but yeah,
I guess for me personally, it would be. I mean, it could happen, like I said, but it would be very. There's just so much. There'd be a lot to do before it could happen. There'd be a lot of.
It's because you don't have the freedom, essentially, right, in your own workplace, in your own context. Is that the main hurdle? Do you think that you don't have that freedom?
Really, Sure. Yeah. I don't. I have some input into the curriculum and what gets done. I'm also considered a part-timer at my school, which is part of it.
That's not going to help.
That's one of the biggest things. Is I'm not really sitting down in the meetings every week.
I see.
The month, and so when it comes to the curriculum decisions, I do get. I mean, our input is asked. The part-timers do get some input, but this would be something that would take a lot more negotiation. This sort
it's
of
a bit above your pay grade, perhaps.
Definitely, yes, definitely above my pay grade. Yeah. So
interesting. Thanks for giving us that other other side of the coin, I guess.
Sure.
Finally, sorry to keep you waiting, Neil. You've also done a review or two in the past as well, I believe. So, again, Fabio's paper. Any? What did you think to it?
So you know what? It was interesting because the other reviews I've done have been for playground pieces, and the walkthrough and articles are much deeper and much more of a formal style piece. And so that was really interesting. The one thing that stood out to me, like I teach a similar age group to Fabio. So where I had been teaching middle school, like grades 6, 7, and 8, and next year grade 9. I'm working with a similar age group in a similar context, although not the same curriculum areas. So I thought it was really interesting as I read through it and reviewed it, to see the pedagogical choices that Fabio had made, and how it's rooted in what he was seeing in his classroom, in his own experience. And I think that was really interesting to me, and then to see how that developed as Fabio wrote drafts of the paper and engaged in conversations with us online. And so that. And I think that was similar to what I think Brandon was mentioning about seeing the kind of personal decisions that you're making in your classroom and your lessons. Because I think a lot of times if I read, literature or research in education, often that's something that's missing, because when you're a teacher in a classroom, you're making all these decisions that are so important and so dynamic, and it changes everything that you it kind of changes everything that you do based on what's happening in your classroom, who the learners are. One element that really stood out to me is, and I think I noticed, Fabio, as you were writing your paper, how this kind of developed. You talked about your own experiences learning English and how you were learning from games, and then you were wanting to bring that into your classroom. And that really stood out, because I think that sometimes our own experiences in our own lives come into play with what we do in our classrooms, and we don't always realize it. But watching that section develop, I thought that was really fascinating and really interesting, and I loved the examples that you added in as you went through.
Thank you very much, Neil. You mentioned working in a similar context, just basically because I'm slightly ignorant of your context, but I guess that Fabio's work plan, it's not limited to English. Of course, it could be used for other foreign languages. Are you saying a similar context in terms of you're a foreign language teacher? I didn't have that vibe.
No. I'm saying a similar context in terms of Fabio's paper was written from his experiences teaching junior high. And so junior high would be a similar age level to what I teach. I would say that I would have, although like I had been teaching multimedia and technology courses, I would have a number of new English learners in my classrooms. However, I would not be responsible for teaching English directly, rather than, supplementing and adapting what's already happening. But I would be using games in my classroom, especially as a tool for communicating and helping bridge some of those. Sometimes there's students who don't feel comfortable talking and participating in classrooms, especially with formal group discussions and lessons. But when you play a game, you start to notice some of those kids who maybe are reluctant to participate in discussions and activities. Suddenly, it's a much more welcoming environment where they can participate in a more active and meaningful way.
Just to riff on that very slightly, there are a few papers in the literature talking about, games as a youth culture. I mean, this is open to the floor, really, but Neil mentioned it. So the idea of, games as a youth culture and students having familiarity with games, it can be something that they have, this idea of cultural capital in that they have gaming capital. They know about games. So when games come into the classroom, it's like, oh, hey, this is something that I know. It's not an ancient tome, or it's not 1950s movie or something. It's something that they can relate to straight away, which maybe opens them up a bit more. Would you say that from your experience then, Neil, and others here? Is that what you're talking about? Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen that firsthand in my classroom. I've seen that even with my own kids, but games are things that they open, not everybody necessarily wants to hang out in a classroom and, talk about history or something. But then when you can bring games into the discussion, suddenly you have these kids that their interest is really peaked, and they're able to kind of bring in, their own sort of experiences and what they like doing.
Yeah,
that's great.
I feel like we're touching this, kind of going back to this notion. It's strange, and I'm ignorant of science, believe me. But this idea of the common DNA of good narratives, for instance, when I teach Dante's Inferno, right, this very old text that it's hard to read for those of us who know how to read it, but I teach it together with the video game, that was based on it very loosely. The students, I had several students inevitably tell me, Professor, I'm going to warn you, day one, I'm bad at literature. And I look at them and I say, really? Let's look into that. And so we kind of talk about this idea of even going back, like Neil was saying, this going back to Homo Ludens, right? Heisen talking about this idea of us as humans learning to play before we learn to read, before we learn to speak. It's in our DNA, play. So I think there's just some primordial nerve that you can touch and be like, they're not bad at this. You've been doing it forever, So I appreciate that, pointing that out, and I find the same thing with Dante.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, reviewers, for your review and your praise for Fabio's paper. I'm going to throw the floor back to Fabio one more time, and then we'll wrap up with some questions. So Fabio, it's your chance now to tell us, what are you most proud of in the paper? Please brag it up.
I'm very happy I managed to keep the human kind of relationship with the students very strong in the paper, because now that all the reviewer commented it, and I'm now certain that I managed to do that. And I don't know if I did it because I'm not ready to write technical yet. So maybe that's the only way I can write. But also, when I was writing, I was trying to talk to myself 2 years ago when I was starting to look for a way to play with games, because I read so many papers with content that I couldn't use in my context. So I was trying to talk to Fabio that I haven't started studying game-based teaching or Ludic language pedagogy. So I'm happy that I managed to do that. But if we have to talk about the proudest moment, it's all focused on the students, of course. All my proudest moments are related to the student reaction to what I was doing. So I remember going to class. It was the third or the fourth time we were playing, and I wasn't sure about the student reception of my project. And I remember a couple of students asking me, are we going to play Mr. Spano's game today? And when I said yes, most of them started dancing and cheering. And as a teacher, and I was like, yeah, you don't know, you're actually learning. You think you're having fun, but you're actually learning. You naive. Nice. That was great for me, because actually I was starting, it was the third or fourth time, so I was starting to see the result, So seeing them so happy to play the game was great as a teacher, of course.
Yeah.
But also, yeah, another proudest moment is when I actually when I played the strategy class, so the no game class.
The no game class.
We spent a class which was my game project, and I told the guys today we're doing the game project, but we'll not play a game. And I presented them with a puzzle to solve related to the gameplay of Two Rooms and a Boom. And seeing every class nailing it in their own way, but still keeping like the playful attitude, even if we were not playing, that was a great success because, moving to accuracy is a strong part of every TBLT activity, like James York teaches in his paper, because you have to know that I'm very good at copying James York work and getting credit for it. That's my main skill.
We'll have to come up with something else then next.
Yeah, please. I'll be there. So I was happy to see this thing happening even in my class and having kids having fun or applying, like improving even in accuracy with actually got kind of a game mindset, even if we were doing accuracy, That was amazing to witness.
Yeah, I think there's so much in the paper. Go on.
And of course, the evaluation when the guy that wrote, I learned how to lie, for me was a great win. Yeah. I learned how to lie in English. I was like, amazing.
What more human statement could a student make? I learned to lie. It's a human thing.
Yeah, right.
Fabio, thanks for that. So we've talked about the paper very broadly, a few specifics. But there is a very detailed walkthrough. We call these papers walkthroughs because we consider them kind of like the old game walkthroughs where you would, the Final Fantasy VII game walkthrough on GameFAQs, it's probably 300 pages long or something. But the idea is that a teacher walks through their context and how they taught, why they taught, what they did, what the results were. Is it game over? Is it going to be, replay? That kind of thing. So if you're interested in finding more out about Fabio's paper, please check the LLP site. The link will be in the description. Now, we're going to move on to the final section, which is just general questions. Our big boss here has been quiet the whole time. So, Jonathan, I'm sure you've got some questions. Would you like to start?
Sure. I think it's wonderful that all of the reviewers have talked about Fabio's teaching with his students, right? Like Brandon, Neil, Casey, like you all mentioned how invested Fabio was with his students and also how reactive you were, right? The things that you saw, you did something different the next class, right? To try to help your students out. It's just fantastic. It's wonderful to hear that from reviewers and to see that in a paper in LLP. It's really heartwarming to have this kind of community and to have a group of dedicated teachers around. Related to that, like my question really is about writing the walkthrough. Like James said that it's supposed to be a detailed description. Fabio, how did you balance making all those decisions and reacting to what students did and taking notes and being a researcher? It's really hard for me to imagine how you were able to capture all those details, all those anecdotes, all those interactions with your students. Like, were you writing things down after class? Like, what was your research approach, or what was your reflective teaching and note-taking approach, I guess, for others to learn from? Because you did a great job, right?
Here's the thing. When I started this project, I was not planning to write a paper about it. So I was completely focused on the teaching and how to make it good for the students. And all the notes I took was also based on my knowledge of the students' skills and attitude. I think I specified that in the paper. So I did not I didn't write down everything that happened. I wrote down what was something significant that happened, considering the student skills. Right. For example, a student usually shows a very high level of English compared to his peers. When he said something, maybe I didn't write it down. Well, when another student, which is usually weak, or actually we talked about using weak, not as proficient as the other, when he said the same thing, then I wrote it down. That's when I wrote it down. So I wasn't noting everything. I was writing only what was significant, thanks to my knowledge of the student skills. So that helped me. Knowing the students helped me a lot into, deciding what to write, what to note, what was important and was not. That's something that helped me a lot.
Yeah. Were you writing things down during class or after class mostly?
Sometimes during class. For example, especially actually when after the third class, I started writing. I was like, okay, actually, this is something that should be recorded. And when I realized that, I was like, since I was participating in the game, because I wasn't like a silent observer, I was actually trying to encourage the guys to play. Come on, guys, do you know the scholar? Ask him. I was like that for the whole, not for the whole, but often I was like that. Sometimes I heard something that was worth noting, then I'd stop everything and write it down very fast, to go back into supporting the students. So
that's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome.
And often after classes, since every single student, after every single class, had to write a reflection sheet about the class, which is completely free. So that also gave me information. And actually, they gave me a lot of notes too, thanks to this reflection sheet that happened after every single class. It's something that the students were used to because they write it not only after the game classes, but they used to write it after every single English class, even if it was not related to the project. So that's student reflection, student frequent reflection. We're talking about 78 reflection sheet a week. So every 2 weeks, sorry. So that was a load of information that I could, compare to my feelings, with my perception, and turn into the reflection that I actually was able to write into the paper. I also took videos from time to time. That also helped. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Fabio, I wanted to ask you a question. I think earlier in the podcast, you made a comment about the cognitive side of playing the game and what you saw in your students. And I thought that was really interesting. And I wondered if you could just talk about that a little bit.
Of course. So what I mean by cognitive improvements related to the language is we're thinking about the way students were thinking in order to participate into the game, even without the production part yet. So lying, bargaining, all this kind of skills, bargaining. Yes, thanks. All these kind of skills that are necessary to win. There's some students that have more trouble in production actually made use of those skills, actually improved in those skills, being able in the end to use them with the language. Of course, not in an extremely productive way, but they started bargaining with very simple language. I remember a student with dyslexia managing to bargain before, for example, the first time, you shouldn't show your card in this game to anybody. But every student was doing it because they don't know how to bargain yet. But slowly, they started to try to lie or deciding to what extent show their card and stuff. And that happened before the actual language production. So they were starting lying, starting trying to persuade each other with gesture, and then they request the language in order to show this kind of process, to actually say it and to make it English, basically. So I guess that the will to win, the will to participate, or the will to collaborate, or the will to have fun is what unleashed this cognitive improvement that eventually ended up being language improvement. So I think it felt like... Go ahead.
I was just going to say that it goes to show that even a simple game, people might think you're just having fun, but there's a lot going on just to play a simple game like this. You need to figure out how to double cross, or what you should do, what you shouldn't do, and that's on top of trying to use a second language. So if people think that playing something like like this is a frivolous waste of time, then when Fabio is saying that not only language production but also cognitive production can be gained, right?
You know what, to me as a teacher, that's really interesting, because as I go through curriculums, I see a lot of reference to those cognitive skills, cognitive processes, critical thinking, communication. And then a lot of those curriculum outcomes or goals that I read are also very similar to some of the things you do when you play a game. And you're talking about, like, you know, persuading and forming strategy. And that's something that I think really connects to a ton of curriculums, whether it's language arts, social studies, it could be business and marketing. There's many different ways to connect the gameplay in a game like this and many other games to a whole variety of curriculums. And so that, to me, is, as you described that, Fabio, that's really interesting to me as a teacher who teaches other subject areas. And I think that's something that is important to look at when you think about games in the classroom. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, thank you for that. And I agree with you, because I guess that the main difference when we teach language and teach something else when it comes to game-based teaching is that with languages you can potentially use any game in the native language, while for other subject maybe you have to be a little bit more selective, because you have to use the game content to hit the subject. It's not the language anymore. But apart from that, yeah, like as far as this intrinsic motivation connected to winning the game goes, then yeah, I agree with you. There's so many subjects that can be taught with games.
I hope you found this episode useful. If you are interested in learning more about Fabio's work, please visit the LLP homepage, where you can read the paper in its entirety and download related materials for free. If you like this episode, please consider commenting, sharing, subscribing, all that normal stuff. And if you would like to join our community, we have a Discord. The link is in the description. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you on the next podcast.